You have been gardening for a while and you are getting excited as you're now planning to add worm farming to your gardening experience. For many, when they are going to start a worm farm, what they do is talk to others or go online and look at what others are using, and that is what they use to determine the type of worms that they're going to get. And so most people will go ahead with red wrigglers and European night crawlers. What if I could show you a better way to select your worms so that you can have the best result? For example, some people live in cooler areas, some in tropical, some in very hot environment. So there are different types of composting worms that can handle different circumstances. And therefore, when you're making your choice, you want to make the best choice for the best result. I'm your host, White Davy, and I'm going to be sharing with you how you can select the right type of worm for your environment. But before we go any further, why not hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification so that you can get updates on these informative videos. So let's start with cool weather. If you live in an environment where it's mostly cool, then there are three options for composting worms. Now we have the Canadian night crawlers, and these worms are best for cool environment because they cannot handle heat at all. Once the temperature reaches 20 degrees Celsius and above, then the Canadian night crawlers will start to die off. When the weather is cool, they can survive outdoors depending on how cold it is, and their eggs will survive, their cocoons will survive freezing. Then you have and these ones, they can live in temperatures down to 4 degrees quite comfortably. And that is why if you go to the bait store, you will find these Canadian night crawlers being stored in the fridge because that temperature is just quite okay for them. Next, we have the red wrigglers. For the red wrigglers, and the European night crawlers, they are kind of similar in terms of temperature range that they can handle. They can handle a bit of cool and they can handle a bit of heat. So that is what makes them so versatile. That is what makes so many people choose red wrigglers and European night crawlers as their main worms. So if you live in an environment where you experience really cool climatic condition and warm climatic conditions, then red wigglers and European night crawlers work best for you. Canadian night crawlers, you have to keep them cool. So if you have them and you find that the temperature is going to be 20 and above, then you want to find methods of keeping these worms cool. They are not very good composting worms. They will compost what you feed to them, but they're more inclined towards leaf matter and garden refuse than they are to food scraps. They will consume the food scraps, however. They reproduce at a very slow rate. So for each Canadian nightcrawler that you have, mature nightcrawler, you will get roughly 15 hatchlings from them during the course of a year from one. So they don't reproduce as fast as the other composting worms, and they're a little bit more work to keep them cool. The European nightcrawlers and the red wrigglers, like the Canadian nightcrawlers, can survive freezing. Sorry, their cocoons can survive freezing. And so, if for whatever reason the temperature should fall and your worms freeze, at least the cocoons that are there will be able to hatch when the time warms up enough for them to hatch, as long as the condition in the bin is right. For example, they have the moisture and they have the food. Now, for people who live in warm or hot climate, your best option is using one of two worms or both, and it is the Indiana blue worms or the African night crawlers. These worms do very well in hot climates, but they cannot handle cool climatic conditions. These are very good composting worms, just as much as the red wrigglers and the European night crawlers are, and they reproduce fairly similarly. But when you have these European night crawlers, sorry, African night crawlers, One thing to note is that their cocoons cannot survive freezing. So you want to ensure that you keep your cocoons and your African night crawlers cool. These African night crawlers cannot handle cool climates either. Blue worms can handle some amount of cool climate, but they are good with heat. They can handle a lot of heat. So these are the factors that you're going to be using when you're choosing your worms, depending on the environment that you live in. That way you can get the best result when it comes to the rate at which your worms reproduce and the rate of which they produce castings. Now, as we look at starting that worm farm so that you can have a more productive garden, we do worm farming for different reasons. And so in next week video, we're going to be digging deeper into worm farming. So if you want to learn more about worm farming, why not join us next week where we'll be going deeper into more topics on worm farming. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have yourself a wonderful day. Yeah, man, a time for growth.